Right, hello and welcome to this short video presentation on the importance of business cases within the NHS. My name is Andrew Scowcroft. I run a company called Open Ground, which is a leadership and management development company, and I've been delivering both physical sessions and video sessions to the deanery and other parts of the university for several years now. What I'm going to cover with you in this short presentation is why the NHS as an organisation seems to rely on these things called business cases in order to put forward a case for change, for improvement, for spending money, for saving money, and also for doctors in particular, how to put one of these things together. What do they have to contain? And what are the common traps that people fall into when they're trying to present to an organisation such as the Welsh Government or the UK Government or even a local health board in Wales. So first of all, why do we need business cases within the NHS? The first reason is that more often than not you are asking for public money. It may well be new public money, or it may well be a different use for the public money that's already been available. And therefore it's absolutely vital that the people who are making the decisions are able to show a transparent audit trail, if you like, a sort of transparent option appraisal to show that the decision they took to allocate money to your project was a sensible decision given all of the facts available. And we tend to use the term business case in order to describe these. It would be similar if you were setting up in business and wanted to go to the bank for money. They would need a business plan. And essentially a business case is just the public sector equivalent of a business plan. The second reason why it's important for you to produce a business case is that the people you're going to for money and for support are likely to have received several other proposals from other parts of the profession. And therefore they need a way of comparing one business case or one idea against all of the others. And as you might expect from a sort of bureaucracy type of organisation like the civil service, the more they can put these things into a standard template, the easier it is to compare apples with apples and pears with pears. If they simply just said, put down on a document what you want and why, it would actually be quite difficult to analyse and compare cases between each other. And the third reason for having a business case, less obvious this one, but just as important, just the process of putting one together does actually help sharpen the thinking and clarify the thinking of the people who are putting that bid together in the first place. And several of my clients have said to me, just the act of working through the template that you gave us made us think differently about our proposal. We realised that we had to include things that previously we hadn't, or possibly play down other things that we thought were particularly important, but perhaps the decision makers wouldn't have. So those really are the reasons why a business case is necessary. If you're in this area, you'll find the language includes terms like an outline business case and a full business case. And if you have time after you've watched this video presentation, you might just want to Google local health board or government, just type in business case health boards, business case health trusts if you're working in England, and you will see page after page of papers that have been presented to board meetings, and you'll see the business cases that are being put together. And they tend to fall into these two categories, outline and full. It's not rocket science this. An outline business case is just that. It tends to be less detailed, it tends to set the scene for what's to come, and the idea of an outline business case is to get approval in principle. What you want from the decision makers is the sort of decision that says, we like this idea, in principle we think we're going to support it, but you do need to do more detailed analysis of the figures or of the research or of the data. But the idea itself seems reasonably sound. In contrast, a full business case is just what it says. It's all the bells and whistles. It's the whole thing. You tend to find these documents will run to several 20, 30, 40, 50 pages. Some of the more complex business cases could well run to 100 and 150 pages. As doctors and as clinicians generally, you might recoil at the idea of having a document that big. But again, if you are going to reconfigure the health services of a local population, sooner or later somebody's going to come back and say, was this a well thought through decision? And therefore, the evidence that you put into a business case is where the justification will be. So an outline business case is just that, approval in principle. The purpose of a full business case is, yes, you have the green light, get going and make this happen. Here's the money, or here's the permission to act. You'll also find in business cases that there are some standard sections. No two business cases will be absolutely identical, but as I said earlier, the public sector, the civil service in particular, does like having things to a standard template. So it's not unusual for you to see 5 main sections within a business case. The more complex cases, yes, you will see 10, 15 sections. For a simple business case, they may be collapsed into 2 or 3 paragraphs. But you will be able to track these 5 sections, whatever the paragraph headings say. They are a summary of your case. In other words, in a nutshell, can you explain the idea, the justification, the costs, the benefits, and how you're going to deliver it in a few short paragraphs. Any of you viewers that have been to board meetings will have seen papers presented which have something called an executive summary, and that's what a summary of a business case is. Somewhat flippantly, it's for the people that can't be bothered to read the whole document. Can they get an idea in 2 or 3 paragraphs or 2 or 3 pages exactly what you are asking for? The second section is known in the jargon as the strategic case. And this is where you need to show how your proposal or idea fits in with the other strategies and policies and priorities of the organisation you are approaching for a decision. So let's take a health board here in Wales. There will be plenty of other strategies, public health strategies, reconfiguration strategies, clinical trial strategies that they have already going on. So they want to know how your case fits in. Does it align itself with something they're already doing? Does it challenge or contradict with something they're already doing? How will it add value to what the organisation is already doing? The strategic case will also need to cover the timing. Where will this fit into their planning cycle? Will you make sure that if the money is allocated in April, that you are doing your planning in November, December, January, and not writing a business case in May, which you expect to get funded there and then? So that's the strategic case, and on screen you'll see an example of what a strategic paragraph or 2 might look like for a typical business case. The third section, so far we've covered the summary and the strategic case. The third section will be the economic case. In other words, this is where you start to lay out in detail the various options that you have considered in how you're going to move this idea forward. And it's at this point that a tool called option appraisal comes into play. Later on in the presentation, I'll give you a slide which shows what an option appraisal template looks like. But for the moment, you just need to know that the economic case you write has to show how the various options stack up. If you're going to want a proposal which says we need to spend money on 3 locum doctors, well, what other alternatives did you look at? And you need to compare and contrast those options, and that's where the economic case comes in. You also need, and this is regularly forgotten by people who don't do business cases for a living, you need to include what I call the do nothing option. In other words, what would be the implications if we didn't do anything? I've seen business cases fail not because the ideas that they put forward were not brilliant. The numbers stacked up, But what they failed to do was to articulate the damage that would be done if nothing were done. And because of that, the decision-making body simply turned around and said, you've not made the case for change. Your ideas are good, but why should we be changing anything at all? So you must always include the do nothing option. The fourth section is what we call the financial case. This is where you start to get into the detail of the numbers. How much will your proposal cost? Is it new money? Is it recycled money? Is it a proposal which requires money now, which will deliver savings later? In which case you need what is the public sector equivalent of a bridging loan. You need the money up front, which you will agree to pay back through savings. Is it a redistribution of money from another part of the service, perhaps where a clinical service or an administrative service is being scaled back, and you can use those savings in order to fund your new project? You need to tell them when you want the money. Again, make sure you fit in with the budgeting cycle of the organisation you're going to. And the final section of the 5 sections that I think you will spot in most business cases is the achievability case. This is where you persuade the decision-making organisation that you can actually deliver what needs doing if they were to say yes. So typically this is where you might put in things about the project management approach. Who's going to run the project? Again, is it new staff, in which case you have to spend money on them, or is it asking staff that are already employed by you to take on that responsibility? What are their credentials for doing this? What's their experience of managing projects? How long will the project take? When will you require the money at stages through the project? What's the risks of the project going wrong, and how will you manage those risks? So in other words, in the achievability case, the organisation needs reassurance that if it's by your idea and they say yes, that there's a reasonable chance of it being delivered on time, on budget, with the outcomes that you promised. And being slightly topical, you may be aware that the NHS regularly runs into problems with its major IT projects, many of which run over time and over budget, and the politicians eventually pull the plug on them. And that to me is evidence that the idea is brilliant, it's been well costed. The trouble is, it's not been project managed successfully and professionally. So those are the 5 sections: a summary of your case, the strategic case for change, the economic case where you look at all the options and score and compare and contrast those options, the financial case, and finally the achievability case. Can you actually deliver what you promised? So what I would advise you to do after you've watched and listened to this is just go on Google and have a look at a few business cases. Not to copy them, but just to see whether you can spot those 5 themes. The simple ones will probably use those headings. The more complex ones will come up with their own headings, but you should by now be able to spot those 5 themes. I mentioned option appraisal earlier on, and option appraisal is one of those tools that if it's not contained within an within a business case, it's likely that the organisation will find a reason to say no. So what is it? Well, as the name suggests, it's where you set side by side different options for achieving the same outcome. You identify criteria by which you can then weight or judge the merits of each option. You score those options up using those criteria, and numerically at the end of that process there will be one option that scores the most. And having done that, although it sounds like quite a soulless process, once you've done that, you would be hard pushed to then say, well, that's what the figures say, but we actually think there's a better proposal. The key is to make sure the criteria are designed and agreed upon before you start generating options. So to take a simple example, if I wanted to improve access by vulnerable sections of the community to primary care, I wouldn't start listing the ways of doing that. I would start by listing the criteria by which we will judge any proposal that comes forward. So it might be accessibility. It might be ability to understand what's being provided to that vulnerable group. It might be cost. It could be a range of things, but you come up with those criteria and you weight them. So you decide which criteria are the most important and you provide them with a greater weighting or a greater percentage. You then develop the options and you score the options up. And on screen you will see a made up, quite spurious option appraisal process where you can see the scoring mechanism, the weighting mechanism, and you can see which option comes out the best. The reason I'm stressing this rather soulless process is because you're spending public money or wanting public servants to spend time on a project. If you can't demonstrate that it is self-evidently a better way forward than all of the others that you looked at, why should they say yes? In some way it's the same with clinical practice. Why would you prescribe a drug where quite evidently there are better drugs available which have been tested and shown to work? Where would be your justification for doing that? It's exactly the same with business cases. So that's option appraisal. The second tool that is often used within business cases is something called risk analysis. This is a much more simple system, and you will see it increasingly used within public sector board papers. And it's like the traffic light system. Red, unacceptable. Amber, we're not sure about. Green, that's probably an acceptable risk to take. And what that involves is you identify what harm or negative impact could come from any of the options that you've generated, and you score them on a basis of 1 to 5. 1, really not very harmful, and 5 is terribly harmful. And in the other axis, you identify what the likelihood of that risk occurring would be. Again, on a scale of 1 to 5. 1, very unlikely to happen. 5, extremely likely to happen. And by simply multiplying those scores together, you get a result which tells you whether this is a proposal that just carries too much risk or not. And again, on screen, you will see an example of a coding system for risk analysis. That's it in terms of business cases. There's a couple of pieces of good practice that I just need to give you. Make your business case interesting. I don't mean put it on scented violet paper. I don't mean use snazzy words, but just make sure that the people who are reading it are drawn into the document. In other words, give it some soul, give it some humanity. It may well be an incredibly complex, detailed document, and you do not want to use the emotional wild card as a way of trying to blackmail people into saying yes. But remember, these people are probably reading 5, 10, 15, 20 business cases per week. So it's a bit like a CV or an application form for a job. Just make sure that there is enough in there to draw the reader in. Second piece of good practice, get it right first time. Don't send it off to an organisation only for it to come back full of red pen marks saying, not sure about this, you haven't explained that. Because even if you do it a second time and send it back to them, they can't unremember that this was the business case that was so flawed last time. So it's a good idea to read it through, get it right, and this is a really important point. Check it with somebody who doesn't work in your area. They may not know the technicalities, but they'll be able to tell you whether or not it has the right tone, whether all its arguments come together or whether there are some loose ends. Don't leave yourself in the position where you think it's brilliant, but it goes to somebody outside your profession who looks at it and goes, I have no idea what these people are talking about. Demonstrate value. Make sure that your business case is more than just a stopping the rot business case. It's something that will take the service forward. Politicians, administrators, managers, the whole mantra these days is about service improvement. So don't be defensive in your business case. Try and make it a case that's actually a step change, moving things forward rather than just preventing them from getting worse. I know that sounds a little optimistic. You may feel that the business case that you're putting in will just stop the rot, in which case be honest about it. But wherever possible, try and make sure that the business case moves the service forward. And the final thing to say is make sure that the audience you're sending it to will be able to understand what you're saying. For example, and I don't want anybody to misinterpret what I'm about to say, I'm not talking about intelligence levels, I'm just talking about familiarity with the language and the concepts. As clinicians, you know that some of the information that you put out to patients would be different in style and tone than information you would put out to your fellow professionals. So if you're sending a business case beyond the medical profession, you may well have to use concepts and phrases which are not your everyday ones, but would resonate and make sense in that organisation that's looking at it. Similarly, if you are having to go to a charity or a self-help group with a business case, they may need a completely different tone and style of document. So don't just prepare a medically perfect document which you talk amongst yourselves and say, this is absolutely brilliant, and then just send it to an organisation that doesn't speak your language. The risk is that you will be accused of patronising them. The second risk is they'll say no because they'll miss the nuance. They'll miss the things that are really important because of almost their word blindness to some of the concepts that you're introducing. So, just to summarise, business cases are here to stay. It's no good as clinicians saying, oh, this is just endless bureaucracy. Why do we have to fill in these forms and these templates? If you want the public sector to say yes, they'll want a business case, particularly where there is money at stake. Make sure its structure makes sense: summary, strategic case, economic case, financial case, achievability case. Make sure that any option appraisal or risk analysis you do is transparent and easy to understand even for non-clinicians. And a word of warning, please do not stitch up the criteria so that they favour the proposal you always wanted. That's pretty easy to spot for most qualified civil servants. So just make sure that the whole process is self-evidently evidence-based. And finally, write it in a way which is accurate but likely to engage the different audiences that you are dealing with. Don't assume that your case is going to be read by a bunch of doctors. So I wish you well if you have to do a business case as part of this programme or any other part of your professional life, and I wish you well with it. Thank you for watching.